Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. In the quiet town of Umuarama, a typical morning unfolded like any other. People were heading to work. Familiar faces filled the streets, and the scent of fresh coffee still lingered in the air. No one could have imagined that something so deeply disturbing would occur on one of its quiet streets, something that would forever divide the town into a before and after. Nothing felt the same anymore. An entire family vanished overnight, leaving behind nothing but a haunting silence. It became a tragic event that residents would talk about for years to come. Umuarama is a town in the southern region of Brazil, located in the state of Paraná. It was home to the Soares family, well known throughout the community. The head of the household, Antonio Soares dos Santos, was born in 1956. A respected businessman, he ran a chain of fabric and accessory stores, not just in Umuarama but also in nearby towns. People saw him as honest, generous, and dependable. He was heavily involved in local charity work, often donating food to those in need, sometimes personally delivering meat and food packages to struggling households. On one occasion, he even welcomed an orphan into his home to raise as part of his family. His wife, Helena Mara dos Santos, born in 1958, was a modest and caring woman who always paid close attention to the needs of others. A full-time homemaker, she dedicated her life to creating a warm and stable home for her family. Helena rarely appeared in public, preferring to focus on her home life, but within her close circle, she was deeply respected for her calm and thoughtful nature. Antonio and Helena had two daughters. The elder, Evelyn Soares dos Santos, was born in 1981. Evelyn earned a law degree and went on to build a successful career in the legal system, eventually becoming a judge. Though she moved out early to start her career, she remained closely connected to her parents and younger sister. The younger daughter, Jacqueline Soares, was born in 1982. Unlike her sister, Jacqueline was more reserved and emotionally sensitive. She also studied law, but her career was less steady, often disrupted by personal challenges and emotional struggles that made it difficult for her to hold down long-term positions. She lived with her parents for most of her adult life, finding comfort and support in the family home. Jacqueline had a particularly close bond with her mother, and despite her quiet nature, she maintained warm and loving relationships with her family. The Soares family home was located in a peaceful neighborhood of Umuarama. Spacious and well-kept, it was more than just a house. It was a symbol of unity and care. It was where birthdays were celebrated, family dinners took place, and everyday life unfolded. Antonio and Helena made sure their daughters always felt secure, loved, and welcomed in that home. On the surface, the Soares family lived a stable, well-balanced life. Hard work, loyalty, and a commitment to traditional values were at the heart of their world. To neighbors and acquaintances, they seemed like the picture of integrity and success, built through honest effort and deep family bonds. This strong foundation supported the Soares family story, one that, up until a certain point, looked no different from countless others in small-town Brazil. But what unfolded later would reveal just how quickly even the most solid life can unravel. Jacqueline Soares met Jean-Michel de Souza Barros when she was about 39 years old. Their paths crossed by chance. Jean was around the same age, appeared well put together, and gave the impression of being someone who could offer the kind of emotional support Jacqueline had long been seeking. At the time, Jean-Michel held a public sector job, had a steady income, and came across as confident. He carefully crafted the image of someone dependable and caring, which quickly won Jacqueline's trust. In those early days, he seemed to offer exactly what she needed: stability, attention, and emotional presence. Their relationship moved fast. Jacqueline's parents, Antonio and Helena, observed the situation with cautious optimism. They hoped this new connection would bring their daughter a sense of peace and security. They didn't voice strong concerns, choosing instead to step back and allow the relationship to evolve naturally. Still, from the very beginning, anyone paying close attention might have noticed some unusual patterns in Jean's behavior. He showed an intense interest in where Jacqueline went and who she spent her time with, questions that often pushed the boundaries of casual curiosity. His remarks about her clothing or social circle initially came off as jokes but gradually turned more insistent and critical. Evelyn Soares dos Santos, Jacqueline's older sister, later recalled seeing signs of excessive control in Jean's actions. Even in the early stages of their relationship, his behavior didn't always align with healthy boundaries. He expressed jealousy over Jacqueline's professional interactions and often complained about her conversations with colleagues in the legal field. As time passed, Jean began to steer Jacqueline away from her usual social engagements. Her visits to the legal association, meetups with friends, and attendance at public events started to dwindle. She began spending most of her time with him, gradually disconnecting from her familiar circles. For Jacqueline, someone who often looked outward for stability, this growing isolation at first seemed like care and protection, but it slowly became a method of control. Antonio and Helena, while striving to keep a close and supportive relationship with their daughter, noticed the shift in her demeanor. Jacqueline grew more withdrawn, shared less about her thoughts, and sometimes justified Jean's mood swings by saying he was just going through a tough time. Hoping not to add pressure, her parents remained patient, believing the situation might eventually settle on its own. Over time, Jean began asserting more influence over Jacqueline's life and, by extension, her family. He was showing up more often at the Suarez home, joining family dinners, participating in holidays, and presenting himself as someone who genuinely wanted to be part of their world. To outsiders, first impressions of Jean were mixed. Some saw a man trying to build a bond. Others felt uneasy about his tone and demeanor. Despite lingering concerns, Jacqueline chose to continue the relationship. After past hardships, the prospect of building a personal life felt meaningful to her. Slowly but surely, Jean-Michel de Souza Barros became a central figure in both her life and the lives of her family. As time passed, Antonio and Helena began to notice changes in their daughter. Jacqueline became more reserved, avoided conversations about her future, and often appeared emotionally drained. Her parents sensed a growing tension, but chose not to confront it directly, fearing that doing so might make things worse. Disagreements between Jean and Jacqueline became increasingly frequent. The triggers were often trivial, yet the arguments quickly turned loud and upsetting. Conflicts were especially common when it came to Jacqueline's professional life, something Jean openly disliked. Even routine phone calls stirred suspicion and jealousy in him. Evelyn, watching the situation unfold, tried to encourage her sister to maintain some level of independence, but her efforts had little effect. Jacqueline became more deeply entangled in a relationship marked by emotional volatility and growing pressure. Though her parents remained supportive, her sense of internal isolation intensified. Inside the Soares household, the once peaceful and harmonious atmosphere grew more strained. Evenings that used to be filled with calm and connection were now disrupted by arguments. Jean's temper and impatience became increasingly apparent, and he no longer held back from expressing frustration, even in front of Antonio and Helena. This deeply concerned the parents, especially regarding their daughter's emotional well-being. Antonio attempted to have open conversations with Jean, offering help or ways to work through issues. But these gestures were often met with cold politeness or subtle irritation. Helena, more attuned to Jacqueline's emotional cues, made a conscious effort to stay close. Yet she recognized how deeply Jean's presence was shaping her daughter's state of mind. At first, the Suarez family hoped the storm would pass. That time would ease the pressure. But instead, every passing day seemed to widen the gap between the life Jacqueline once knew and the one she now inhabited. It became increasingly clear this wasn't just a difficult phase in a relationship, it was the rise of something far more concerning. By the time Jacqueline Suarez and Jean-Michel decided to formally commit, the situation between them had already become strained. Constant arguments, emotional pressure, and overwhelming jealousy left little room for genuine happiness. Still, despite the underlying tension, preparations for the wedding moved forward. From the outset, organizing the ceremony was marked by stress. Once hopeful that marriage might bring a fresh start, Jacqueline now appeared emotionally withdrawn. Her involvement in the planning was minimal. Most of the arrangements were handled by her parents, who tried to support her and maintain a sense of normalcy, even if it was only on the surface. The day before the wedding, a serious incident occurred. Jean had an emotional outburst tied to what he perceived as Jacqueline being unfaithful. The spark? A routine work-related message that he interpreted as a betrayal. His reaction was so intense that it put the entire ceremony at risk. According to those close to the situation, there was even talk of calling off the wedding at the last minute. Antonio and Helena found themselves facing an incredibly difficult decision. On one hand, they were deeply worried that canceling the wedding might worsen Jacqueline's emotional state. On the other, they feared that proceeding with the marriage in such an atmosphere could lead to long-term harm. In the end, they chose not to stand in the way. The ceremony did take place, but it lacked any real sense of celebration. Among the guests, there was a noticeable tension. People weren't smiling. Instead, their expressions revealed discomfort and concern. Many noted Jacqueline's distant demeanor. She barely smiled and moved through the event mechanically. Jean, by contrast, appeared composed. In public, he maintained a calm, respectful image, though those who knew him well sensed an undercurrent of irritation behind his polite exterior. The entire event felt more like a formality than the joyful beginning of a new chapter. In his speech that day, Antonio emphasized the importance of patience and mutual support in marriage. Notably, he avoided traditional expressions of joy or optimism. His words were careful, as though he was trying to balance preserving the moment with voicing concern for his daughter's future. Evelyn, who attended the ceremony, would later recall that a heavy feeling hung in the air from the start of the day. She and other close relatives couldn't shake the sense that things were moving in the wrong direction, that something wasn't right. After the ceremony, the newlyweds returned to Antonio and Helena's home. Originally, the plan had been for Jacqueline and Jean to begin their life together in a separate place. But for various reasons, including financial ones, they stayed in the family home. It was not a joyful decision, but a practical one, and it only deepened the cracks that had already begun to show. Jacqueline tried to adjust to her new reality. She went through the motions, handling daily tasks and avoiding discussions about deeper issues. Jean continued presenting himself in public as a caring husband, but behind closed doors, the tension between them was growing. In the early weeks of their marriage, it became clear that the problems they had faced before hadn't gone away. In fact, living together under the same roof as her parents only made things worse. Small disagreements turned into major arguments. It was becoming obvious that the relationship, rooted in dependency and emotional pressure, had little chance of healing. After the wedding, John fully settled into the Suarez household. At first, it was expected that he would contribute to the family's expenses, but that didn't happen. Jean soon quit his public sector job, claiming he wanted to start his own business. But after stepping away from his job, he didn't take any real steps in that direction. In practice, all financial responsibilities fell on Antonio and Helena. They now supported not just Jacqueline, but also her husband. Jean, without a steady income, showed no urgency about changing his situation. He spent his days mostly idle, showing little interest in finding work or developing a business. Antonio, a man who had built his life on discipline and responsibility, struggled to understand this behavior. It became a quiet source of tension in the home. He tried to gently raise the issue of financial independence, even suggesting possible business ventures Jean could pursue, but Jean responded only with vague promises and excuses. Eventually, Jean approached Antonio with a specific request: financial support to start a sewing supply store. He asked for 30,000 reais, claiming this investment would secure financial independence for both him and Jacqueline. Despite his reservations, Antonio provided the money, hoping that this gesture might finally bring some stability. Instead of investing in a business as promised, Jean used the funds to buy himself a car. This move deeply disappointed Antonio and Helena. Their trust had been broken, but they chose not to escalate the situation right away, hoping to avoid open conflict for Jacqueline's sake. With the car purchase, Jean's reliance on the family only deepened. He continued living off his in-laws, showing no real motivation to change his circumstances. The financial burden on Antonio grew heavier, and the family's respect for Jean steadily declined. Evelyn, watching all this unfold, voiced growing concern about how Jean's inactivity and dependent attitude were affecting the household. She tried to explain to Jacqueline how important it was to establish financial independence, but her efforts seemed to have little impact. Emotionally tied to Jean, Jacqueline often defended his lack of action. She would tell her parents he just needed time to adjust, that he was still recovering from the stress of his previous job, and that his future plans were still unclear. Her attempts to smooth things over only made the situation worse. Over time, arguments in the Suarez household became more frequent. The reasons varied, but the pattern remained. Jean-Michel would become irritable, demand control, and resist any form of compromise. His behavior created constant tension, gradually eroding the home's once warm and welcoming atmosphere. Helena, who had initially tried to keep the peace, now felt increasingly anxious about her daughter's safety and the family's stability. She noticed John's angry outbursts were becoming less predictable. During one argument, he slammed a door so forcefully that it broke. That incident became a red flag for Helena, a sign that the situation might escalate further. One of the most alarming moments came after an intense argument, which led Antonio to take serious protective action. He insisted that Helena and Jacqueline temporarily leave the house and stay at a hotel. While they were gone, he changed the locks. This was a desperate move, meant to restrict John's access to their home and restore a sense of control. Jean saw Antonio's actions as a betrayal. Rather than reflecting on his own behavior, he continued to blame everyone around him for the growing conflict. His aggressive reactions, refusal to acknowledge fault, and unwillingness to change made peaceful coexistence impossible. Despite Antonio's efforts, the problem wasn't resolved. Jacqueline, still under Jean's emotional influence, wanted to preserve the relationship. She pushed for her husband to return home, asking her parents to give him another chance. This conflict between her wishes and the very real threat to their family's safety put Antonio and Helena in a painful and complicated position. The fear for Jacqueline's future continued to grow. Helena, in particular, felt the weight of the situation more intensely. She confided in Evelyn, admitting she no longer felt safe in her own home. And yet, taking firm action was difficult. Any attempt to create distance between Jean and the family was seen by Jacqueline as an attack on her personal life. On August 8, 2021, Father's Day in Brazil, the atmosphere inside the Suarez family home reflected a sense of tradition. Celebrating holidays had always been an important part of their life, and even amid growing tensions, they tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. The morning passed quietly, with no indication of what was to come. Jean-Michel, who by then was no longer living with Jacqueline or her parents, unexpectedly showed up at the house. In his hands, he carried a package, which he offered to Antonio as a Father's Day gift. The visit appeared to be a peace offering, a gesture of reconciliation. Jean's demeanor was composed, and he went out of his way to appear courteous and polite. Antonio and Helena accepted the gift with polite restraint. They didn't show much enthusiasm, but they also didn't refuse it, aiming to keep the situation calm and avoid triggering more conflict. Jacqueline, observing from the side, appeared tense, but tried to maintain her composure as well. Jean stayed at the house for about an hour. The conversation during that time remained on the surface, avoiding any contentious topics. He behaved calmly and didn't provoke any arguments. When he left, there was a lingering sense of ambiguity. His visit felt oddly out of character given the past conflicts and intense outbursts. The seemingly peaceful gesture didn't match the gravity of the unresolved issues that had been building for months. But no one suspected that this day would be the last normal one they would ever experience. What looked like an attempt to make peace was, in truth, hiding something far more serious. Behind Jean's outward politeness were intentions no one could have imagined at the time. On the morning of August 9, 2021, the Suarez residence appeared calm from the outside. Their housekeeper, who arrived early as usual, expected to be greeted by the familiar sounds of morning routines, activity in the kitchen, movement in the hallways. Instead, what met her was an eerie silence. No one responded to her greetings. As she walked further into the house, something felt wrong. Then she saw it, a scene that left her frozen in place. In the dining room, she found Antonio and Helena, both unresponsive. Their position and the state of the room immediately indicated that something violent had taken place. Without hesitation, she contacted emergency services. Police arrived quickly. A preliminary assessment found no signs of forced entry. All doors and windows were intact. The house appeared orderly, except for the dining room, where the scene was centered. Forensic experts determined that Antonio and Helena had suffered a sudden and brutal assault. Both had sustained multiple injuries focused around the head, neck, and chest. The trauma was caused by both blunt and sharp objects, though the exact weapon could not be confirmed. There were no clear signs of defensive wounds, leading investigators to believe the attack was swift, and the victims had no chance to react or escape. Jacqueline Suarez was found upstairs in the bathroom. Unlike her parents, her injuries were far more severe. She had multiple stab and slash wounds, likely inflicted with a sharp blade. The nature of her injuries suggested sustained force, pointing to a possible personal motive behind her attack. The number of wounds on her body was significantly greater than those found on Antonio and Helena. The scene inside the house was deeply disturbing. Investigators documented every detail, photographed the rooms, and collected potential evidence. It was immediately clear that the crime had taken place indoors, and that the victims hadn't resisted or been attacked from the outside. Shock rippled through everyone who entered the scene. Even seasoned officers remarked on the unusually intense level of aggression and how carefully the aftermath had been concealed. An official investigation was launched, aimed at uncovering exactly what had unfolded in that home during the night. Police quickly reached the conclusion that the individual responsible for the crime was familiar to the victims, and had likely not raised any suspicion upon entry. The lack of struggle and the undisturbed nature of the house supported the theory that the attack had been sudden and deliberate. Investigators began questioning the closest relatives, friends, and acquaintances of the Suarez family. Their main goal was to identify who had recently been in contact with Antonio, Helena, and Jacqueline. During the interviews, one name stood out: Jean-Michel de Souza Barros, Jacqueline's former husband, had been seen at the house just one day before the tragedy. His visit took on a new significance. Jean had brought a Father's Day gift for Antonio, spent about an hour inside the home, and then left. This detail quickly made him a central figure in the investigation. His behavior that day, as well as his actions in the hours that followed, became a key focus of scrutiny. Soon, investigators discovered that Jean hadn't returned home immediately after visiting the Suarez family. Statements given by his mother regarding his whereabouts that evening raised doubts. These inconsistencies, along with the absence of any signs of forced entry at the crime scene and other circumstantial evidence, deepened suspicions. By this stage in the investigation, law enforcement had concluded that the crime had likely been committed by someone within the family's inner circle. To verify Jean's alibi, police began reviewing footage from surveillance cameras located throughout the streets of Umuarama. Particular attention was given to routes near the Suarez residence and surrounding neighborhoods. The video analysis confirmed that Jean's car had been seen in the area around the Suarez home on the day of the incident. One camera showed his vehicle heading to another part of town afterward, where it stopped near a storm drain. The footage captured a man matching Jean's build exiting the car, approaching the drain, and tossing something inside. At the same time, investigators analyzed data from the phones of both the victims and the suspect. Jacqueline's phone had a tracking app installed, which could detect the location of associated devices. The data revealed that on the day of the incident, Jean's and Jacqueline's phones were logged at the same locations during several key moments, strongly suggesting they were in close proximity. Not long after that, Jean's phone suddenly stopped transmitting location data. Investigators believed this was a deliberate move to obscure his movements. Based on the surveillance footage and phone data, police headed to the location where Jean was believed to have discarded something. Upon inspecting the storm drain, they recovered 2 mobile phones, belonging to Antonio and Helena. Jacqueline's device was not found, adding complexity to the reconstruction of events. The discovery of the phones in the drain became a critical piece of evidence. It clearly showed an attempt to dispose of potential evidence immediately following the crime. The act appeared methodical, indicating that the suspect may have planned his steps in advance. Each of these findings was carefully recorded and preserved by investigators. According to investigators, it was believed that the weapon used in the crime was a sharp object, possibly a knife or a similar tool. However, the exact type couldn't be confirmed, as the item itself was never recovered. Evidence suggested that different types of force or possibly different objects had been used, or that the same object was utilized with both its blunt and sharp sides. Jean's earlier statements soon began to conflict with the objective evidence. He had claimed that after leaving the Suarez home, he immediately went to his mother's house. However, messages found on his mother's phone painted a different picture. She had been asking him where he was at the time he claimed to have already arrived. Jean denied any involvement in the events. He stated that his visit to the Suarez family was solely to deliver a Father's Day gift and that he left soon afterward. He claimed that he learned about the tragedy from the news. When questioned about the physical evidence, he gave evasive answers or dismissed the findings as coincidences. However, the combination of surveillance footage, inconsistencies in Jean's story, the discovery of discarded phones, and forensic data formed a coherent timeline. At this point, police had sufficient grounds to believe that Jean-Michel de Souza Barros had deliberately attempted to cover his tracks after committing a serious crime. A forensic examination of the Suarez home provided critical new evidence. Specialists used chemical reagents to detect hidden traces of blood. Multiple traces were found throughout the house. especially in the hallways, stairwell, and kitchen. Analysis showed that an effort to clean up had been made shortly after the crime. Water stains and cleaning detergent marks were identified on the floors, along with signs of a mop and a garden hose having been used, indicating a deliberate attempt to erase evidence. Amid this data, particular attention was drawn to footwear impressions found throughout the home. Upon studying these prints, forensic experts noticed an unusual detail. There were two distinct tread patterns, both left by flip-flops. The shapes and sizes didn't match, initially raising the possibility that more than one person had been involved. Further analysis revealed that the differences in sole patterns actually belonged to the same individual. Each print matched a different brand of flip-flop, but the stride length, pressure points, and walking style were identical. This led investigators to conclude that one person had been wearing a mismatched pair, flip-flops from two different manufacturers. During a search, Jean-Michel's black flip-flops were seized. Examination confirmed that the left and right shoes came from different brands. This became a crucial piece of evidence in matching the prints found at the crime scene. Forensic experts conducted a detailed comparative analysis. The shape of the soles, patterns of wear, and pressure distribution matched exactly with the prints discovered in the house. Such a match was highly unlikely to occur by chance, especially given the unique nature of the mismatched footwear. Additional reviews of the scene revealed that the footprints were not random. Instead, they indicated deliberate movement between the bodies and sources of water, from the kitchen to the front door. This pattern showed that the individual was familiar with the layout of the house and was acting intentionally after the crime had been committed. The presence of footprints made by two different flip-flops, confirmed to belong to one person, further reinforced the theory of premeditation. The identification of Jean's footwear as matching the prints found at the scene became a key piece of evidence linking him to the crime at the time it occurred. The forensic conclusions ultimately dismantled any theories that the tragedy was a result of an accidental loss of control or the actions of an unknown outsider. The picture was becoming increasingly clear. The crime had been committed by someone who knew the layout of the house, acted deliberately, and made conscious efforts to cover their tracks. After charges were filed, Jean-Michel's defense team launched an aggressive effort to challenge the evidence gathered by investigators. Their primary strategy was to highlight any details that might raise doubt in the minds of the jurors. One of their main arguments focused on the size of the footwear. The defense insisted that the flip-flops seized from Jean were smaller than his actual shoe size. During the trial, Jean was asked to try them on, and it was visibly clear that the flip-flops appeared tight. His attorneys argued that this discrepancy pointed to either a mishandling of evidence or a potential mistake by investigators. However, prosecutors reminded the court that Jean had voluntarily handed over that specific pair of flip-flops. Furthermore, forensic experts confirmed that the tread patterns and wear marks found at the crime scene perfectly matched the seized footwear, making the size argument far less significant. Another point raised by the defense concerned the blood traces found on a t-shirt recovered from Jean's residence. His lawyers claimed that the bloodstains could have resulted from everyday incidents, such as minor cuts or contact with animal blood. They attempted to portray this evidence as unreliable, noting that the biological material was too minimal for comprehensive analysis. Despite these efforts, the overall body of evidence, including Jean's movements, lack of a credible alibi, the recovered phones, the matching shoe prints, and his conflicting statements, continued to build a strong case for his involvement. The defense's attempts to undermine the evidence struggled against the logical and consistent narrative constructed by the investigation. Jean-Michel's behavior following the tragedy became another crucial factor. His detached reaction, lack of visible grief, and quick move to claim inheritance rights raised serious suspicions. Just weeks after the Soares family's deaths, Jean began legal proceedings to be recognized as the widower of Jacqueline Soares, positioning himself to inherit her assets. This action stunned not only the relatives of the victims, but also the wider community of Umuarama. For many, it served as a moral confirmation of his guilt. Jean's actions immediately following the tragedy suggested a clear financial motive, and they further dismantled any image of him as an innocent party affected by unfortunate circumstances. After a careful review of the evidence, the jury found Jean-Michel guilty of committing a crime against 3 individuals. He was sentenced to 86 years and 8 months in prison and ordered to pay 450,000 Brazilian reais in restitution to the victim's family. While the verdict was seen as a triumph of justice, No ruling could undo the profound loss that had already been suffered. After the verdict, a heavy silence fell over the Soares family home. The only surviving member was Evelyn Soares dos Santos, now left without her parents and sister. Although there was some comfort in knowing the responsible party was held accountable, the pain of loss remained. For Evelyn, a new chapter began, one where every memory of the past carried the weight of grief. The house that once symbolized warmth and unity stood as a silent witness to a tragedy that forever changed the lives of everyone connected to it. In Umuarama, the story of the Soares family remains a stark reminder of how dangerous misplaced trust can be, even toward those once welcomed into your home. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.